Welcome to Whispered Women's Stories. She didn't lose a marriage, she escaped a lie. When his empire collapsed, he knelt in the rain, begging her to save him. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about a woman choosing herself and walking away for good.
01. The divorce talks didn't happen in a cold courtroom. They took place in the home I had once decorated to be warm and elegant, now so suffocating it made it hard to breathe. The expensive Italian crystal chandelier in the living room cast a light like frozen shards of ice, silently slicing through the space. My former mother-in-law, Linda Wilson, sat there with the smug air of a victor, tapping the divorce agreement on the table again and again with her freshly manicured nails. "Emma, I'm not trying to be harsh," she began, her tone sharp but carefully disguised as concern for your own good. "Look at the people David deals with every day now. CEOs, investors, and you? You stay home all day, completely out of touch with the real world. Other wives talk about golf and art investments. Can you even join those conversations? The way you are now, how is David supposed to hold his head up in public?" I ignored her. My gaze cut straight through the nauseating air and landed on David Wilson. He sat across from me, the man I'd been married to for 8 years. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, a Vacheron Constantine on his wrist. I'd given it to him as a gift last year, after he closed that major deal with Puyue Group. Everything about him radiated the polish of someone steeped in success. And yet, at this moment, his eyes were lowered. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of his phone case, like a child who knew he'd done something wrong but refused to admit it. I understood then. That silence was louder than any words. Back when he started Summit Forge, that brand design firm, it was me, a rising designer with a solid reputation, who quit my job without hesitation and followed him, starting out in a tiny rented apartment barely big enough to breathe in. The company logo was the result of 3 sleepless nights on my part. The first few clients came from my father's connections. I smiled until my cheeks hurt, drank until my stomach burned, just to land them. I even filled an entire notebook with the personal preferences of Puyue Group's chairman, Thomas Harris, especially what his wife liked. And now, all of that had evaporated in Linda's eyes, and in her son's. All I had left was a single label, a jobless, socially isolated stay-at-home woman who only dragged him down. I swallowed the familiar bitterness in my throat and said, surprisingly calmly, "So this is what you want too?" David's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. He finally looked up at me, his eyes a tangled mess of guilt, impatience, and a desperate urge to break free. "Emma," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, "Mom may be blunt, but maybe we really do need some space. We're chasing different things now. Staying tied together like this, it's draining for both of us." Draining. What a perfect word. I looked at him and suddenly felt there was nothing left to say. I cut off his vague, future promise compensation speech before it could begin. "No need. I'll walk away with nothing." The air seemed to collapse into a vacuum. Both Linda and David froze, shock written all over their faces. Then Linda's eyes lit up with near greedy excitement. She shot her son a lightning-fast look that clearly said, "Say yes. This is a gift from the sky." I caught that silent exchange, and whatever warmth I had left went cold. "I only have one condition," I said, looking at them as if I were announcing something that had nothing to do with me. "We finalize everything tomorrow." "Perfect." Absolutely perfect. Linda nearly jumped out of her chair, afraid I might change my mind the next second. "Tomorrow morning, 8 sharp, in front of the county clerk's office. Don't be late." The world too. The next day, outside the county clerk's office, David and I moved through every step of the process in silence, like 2 parallel lines that refused to intersect. When that dark red divorce certificate was placed in my hand, I felt a lightness I'd never known before. When I returned to that so-called home, I didn't hesitate for a second. My luggage was just a single 24-inch suitcase, some clothes, a few original design books I treasured, and one photo of my parents and me. Everything else, the luxury bags he'd given me, the jewelry he'd bought, I didn't touch a thing. I pulled my suitcase to the entryway. Behind me, in the living room, Linda's voice finally burst out, unable to contain itself anymore. She was gleefully announcing the news to relatives on the phone. "Oh, second aunt? It's done. Finally done." She walked away with nothing, not $1. "My son is finally free. Now he can be with anyone he wants. Everyone come over for dinner tonight. We're drinking to celebrate." Every single word felt like another hard stomp on a heart that was already shattered. I didn't look back. I opened the door, and sunlight rushed toward me. I raised my hand instinctively to block it. Through my fingers, I saw David standing by the floor-to-ceiling window on the second floor, quietly watching my back. There was no sadness on his face, no reluctance, only relief, like a burden had been lifted, and an undisguised ambition for the future. I took a deep breath, pulled my suitcase behind me, and disappeared into the crowd on the street. Goodbye, David. Goodbye to the illusion I had built with 8 years of my youth. 03. I rented a tiny, rundown apartment near my old college. An old place with a skylight. It was basic, but sunlight could pour in, and that was enough. I didn't tell my parents about the divorce. They were getting older, and their hearts weren't strong. I didn't want them worrying about me anymore. Meanwhile, David's life was turning a brand new page, almost with a sense of showmanship. After Summit Forge successfully secured the annual brand integration project for luxury giant Puyue Group, the company skyrocketed to fame, becoming one of the hottest rising stars in the industry. David himself became a regular feature in business magazines and finance forums. When a man has money, attention naturally follows. And the one who knew best how to step in at the right moment was his company's marketing manager, Sophia Brown. Sophia was young, beautiful, a graduate of a top school with a flawless resume. More importantly, the way she looked at David was always like a devoted believer gazing up at her God. Back when I was still Mrs. Wilson, Sophia's admiration had been perfectly measured. Before executive meetings, she'd quietly place David's favorite cold brew coffee and a small dish of stomach medicine at the corner of the table. When he lost his temper after a proposal was rejected, she'd hand him a neatly organized market analysis and say gently, "Mr. Wilson, I think your creative direction is solid. It's just the execution details that might need a bit more refinement." Back then, David would always reassure me, "Emma, don't overthink it. Sophia's just a kid, very career-driven. She looks up to me like a mentor." Now that this inconvenient mentor's partner was gone, Sophia began asserting her presence without a sound. In the break room, while steeping floral tea, she'd casually sigh to coworkers. "Mr. Wilson was in the office past midnight again last night. I stayed to talk through proposals with him. I'm really worried he's pushing himself too hard." At lunchtime, she'd shyly bring a carefully arranged homemade lunch to David's office, adding softly, "Mr. Wilson, you forgot to eat again, didn't you? Your stomach matters." David soaked it all in. He reveled in being admired and cared for by a young, beautiful, highly educated subordinate. It made him feel like a king, invincible. From the front desk to the executive suite, everyone quietly treated Sophia as the future boss's partner. The entire company was buzzing with excitement. The boss had shaken off the stay-at-home woman who'd lost touch with society and was about to join forces with a brilliant, stunning confidant to lead the company to new heights. Just hearing the story was enough to get people fired up. David felt it most of all. His world had never felt so clean and unburdened. No more petty domestic hassles. No more Emma Carter in his ear reminding him, cash flow has to stay healthy. Don't expand too aggressively. Always respect your clients. He felt like every chain had fallen away, free to chase the stars and conquer the world. But when an avalanche begins, no single snowflake is innocent, and the thing that breaks the camel's back is often just one last straw. 04. On the afternoon of the second day after the divorce, the legal director of Summit Forge, a cautious, middle-aged man named John, was reviewing a new contract. Suddenly, his corporate inbox chimed. A message popped up marked with 3 red exclamation points labeled highest priority. Sender, Puyue Group Legal Department. Puyue Group, Thomas Harris's company. That was Summit Forge's lifeline. More than 60% of the company's revenue came from Puyue's annual contracts. It was no exaggeration to say that PureView had personally nursed Summit Forge from an unknown startup into a rising star in the industry. John's heart dropped. Cold sweat broke out in his palms. He opened the email. Beneath a few brief lines of text was a PDF attachment bearing an official corporate seal. His hands trembling, he clicked it open. Notice of termination of the annual brand strategy cooperation agreement. A dozen bold words slammed into him like punch after punch, leaving his head spinning. The language was formal and icy. It announced that, effective immediately, Puyue Group was unilaterally terminating all cooperation with Summit Forge and demanded that all ongoing projects be handed over and financially settled within 1 month. John's throat went dry. He frantically scrolled, searching for the reason. On the second page, he found the verdict. Pursuant to Clause 7.3 of the appendix to the long-term strategic cooperation agreement signed by both parties on XXXXXX, your company's core principle has committed a fundamental breach. On this basis, our party reserves the right to terminate the agreement unilaterally without liability. Clause 7. What the hell was that? John's mind buzzed. This contract had been personally negotiated by David. When it was signed, the whole company had erupted in celebration. The terms PureView offered were unbelievably generous. The profit margins were outrageous, like money falling from the sky. Everyone had been too busy popping champagne to scrutinize those obscure appendix clauses buried in the fine print. In a panic, John dug through the server for the scanned original contract. Minutes later, he found it. His fingertips turned white as he flipped to the appendix and located the clause that now decided the company's life or death. Clause 7.4. It contained only a single line of small printed text. As a long-term strategic partner, Party B's core principal, David, must maintain a stable and harmonious family relationship. In the event of disputes leading to the breakdown of the family, Party A reserves the right to unilaterally terminate the agreement without fault. John's vision went black. He nearly fell out of his chair. He burst into David's office, almost scrambling in on all fours. Mr. Wilson! Mr. Wilson? This is bad. Really bad. David was leaning back in his executive chair, listening with interest as Sophia reported on next quarter's marketing plan. Her soft, pleasant voice had put him in an excellent mood. John's sudden intrusion instantly darkened his expression. John, what's with the panic? David snapped. Is the sky falling? It's worse than that. John's voice shook as he turned his laptop toward him. Mr. Wilson, you need to see this. PureView is terminating our contract. What? David's smile froze. He snatched the laptop. When he saw the termination notice, especially that absurd, almost insulting reason, his first reaction wasn't fear. It was rage. Family issues? What kind of bullshit reason is that? He slammed his hand on the desk, eyes bloodshot. Emma! It has to be her. That vicious woman. He was convinced I couldn't stand leaving things as they were and had gone to Thomas behind his back, twisting the story, using some dirty trick to get revenge. He grabbed his phone and, without even checking, pressed the number that had already been changed from a pet name to my full name. The call connected almost instantly. Emma! What the hell are you trying to do? You're ruthless. I'll give you that. You went crying to Thomas, didn't you? What exactly did you tell him about me? Did you exaggerate our divorce and play the victim? You think using underhanded tactics like this can ruin me? Dream on! His roar came through the phone like red-hot needles, stabbing straight at me. I held the phone a little farther away. When he'd finally shouted himself hoarse, I spoke, unhurried and calm. You signed the contract yourself, David, I said. My tone as casual as talking about the weather. Black and white. Don't tell me you forgot. That single sentence was like a bucket of ice water, dousing all of David's fury. Right, he had signed it. Black and white. Back then, he'd been dazzled by what seemed like a gift from the sky, convinced that his talent and personal charm had conquered industry giant Thomas Harris. He never imagined that hidden inside that gift was a time-delayed landmine. Emma, he tried to say something, but it felt like his throat was stuffed with cotton. Not a single word came out. I didn't give him another chance. I'm hanging up. As he listened to the dead tone on the line, David felt fear seep into his bones for the first time. A vague realization crept in. This wasn't just an accident. This game was far bigger than he had ever imagined. And on that termination notice, the document deciding the fate of his company, the official reason was brief, precise, and devastating. Unstable family affairs of the principal. Row 5. Fear seized David for a brief moment, but he forced it down almost immediately. He couldn't fall. He was the king of Summit Forge. He went into frantic motion. He mobilized every connection he'd built over the years, trying every possible way to get a meeting with Thomas. All of it led nowhere. Thomas's impeccably polite executive assistant blocked every request with flawless phrasing. Mr. Harris is currently on a retreat and unavailable to meet. The door felt welded shut. And as if that weren't enough, bad news never came alone. The story of Pureview terminating the contract spread through the industry overnight as if it had grown wings. Summit Forge's stock price plunged in response, hitting the daily limit down for 3 consecutive days. The venture capital firms that had been chasing him just days earlier, begging to invest, vanished into thin air. The most lethal blow was cash flow. Without Pureview's quarterly payments, the company's books immediately grew tight. Longtime suppliers, sensing danger, showed up almost in unison to demand outstanding payments. Even the bank's loan officers started calling every few days under the guise of checking in, probing into the company's operations. Between the lines, they made it clear, if things kept deteriorating, the bank might trigger risk controls and call in the loans early. David was like a caged beast, pacing the office day and night, snapping at anyone who crossed his path. And just when he was at his most desperate, the gentle, understanding, listening ear by his side, Sophia, quietly revealed her true face. She no longer hovered around him with open admiration. She began taking frequent leave, citing everything from not feeling well to a family emergency. One day, a clueless new receptionist asked her right in front of David, "Sophia, didn't I see you chatting with a headhunter at a cafe downtown last week?" Sophia's face drained of color on the spot, and David's heart, in that instant, went ice cold. He called Sophia into his office and shut the door. "You're lining up your next job?" he asked bluntly. She tried to deny it at first, but under David's icy stare, she dropped the act. "Mr. Wilson," she said calmly, adjusting the collar of her Chanel suit, the softness and admiration in her eyes completely gone, replaced by cold calculation. "People climb upward. That's just how it works, isn't it? Everyone knows what shape this company is in. I can't sink with a ship that's about to go under." David trembled with rage, his voice breaking. "I've treated you well. Every position, every resource you wanted, I gave them to you." "Yes, you treated me well." Sophia let out a short, scornful laugh, sharp and thin. "But so what? What can you give me now? A company that could be bankrupt any day? Or an empty promise of someday being the boss's partner?" "David, don't be naive. I admired the successful man under the spotlight, not this version of you, drowning in problems and unable to save even yourself." With that, she turned on her heels and walked out, high heels clicking, without looking back. David was left standing alone in the empty office, tasting the bitterness of total betrayal. He later heard from others that while Sophia was job hunting, she'd also been secretly contacting several core engineers from the tech department, planning to take them with her as a package deal, and offering to a rival company. Every path was blocked. David's world was falling apart, at a speed he could no longer stop. 06. In the boundless depths of despair, David thought of one last and clumsiest option, cornering Thomas in person. He spent a large sum bribing a distant relative of Thomas's driver and finally learned that every Thursday afternoon, Thomas routinely visited a private members-only tea lounge called Pinewind Pavilion. That Thursday afternoon, David cleaned himself up as best he could. He shaved carefully, put on his finest suit, and waited outside the lounge with the last shred of hope, almost like a pilgrim awaiting salvation. More than an hour later, A familiar, understated black Audi A8 slowly pulled up to the entrance. David rushed forward, almost stumbling over himself. Before the bodyguard could even raise a hand to stop him, David stood in front of the car door, his posture bordering on pleading. Thomas stepped out of the car. Seeing David like this, he showed no real surprise. He simply glanced at him calmly and said flatly, "Let's talk inside." In the innermost private room of the lounge, a Japanese-style suite, even the expensive agarwood incense couldn't calm the turmoil in David's chest. He lowered himself as far as he possibly could. Before the tea was even served, he broke down, crying as he poured out his so-called grievances. "Thomas, I'm begging you. Please give me one more chance. This is all my ex, Emma's fault. She can't stand seeing me succeed. She's vicious. The moment we divorced, she held a grudge and went around ruining my reputation. She must have said something to you." He kept rambling, shoving all the blame onto me. Thomas, however, raised a hand and cut him off. The man, now in his 60s, someone who had spent his entire life weathering the tides of business, slowly warmed a teacup with the tongs before speaking. What he said next sent David straight into an icy abyss. "David, did you know that 20 years ago, my business failed? I was drowning in debt. Everyone avoided me like the plague." Thomas's gaze drifted toward the bamboo grove outside the window, as if pulled into a distant memory. "When I had nowhere left to turn, when I was so desperate I even thought about ending my life, it was your father-in-law, Michael, who found me." David's sobbing stopped abruptly. He froze. His father-in-law? All David knew was that Michael was a retired professor with an odd temperament. How could he possibly have a connection to Thomas? Thomas continued, "Michael and I barely knew each other back then. Just a nodding acquaintance. When he heard what had happened to me, he didn't say much. He showed up at my door with a suitcase. There was $500,000 in cash inside. In the 1990s, that was a fortune. He told me that money was what he and your partner, Emma, had saved over nearly 10 years. It was meant to pay for her heart surgery. Emma was sick as a child. She had a congenital heart defect. The doctor said surgery before 18 would be best. Michael gave me that money and said only one thing. Thomas, I trust your character. Take this and rebuild your life. My daughter's surgery can wait a little longer. I used that money to make a comeback. That's how Pureview came to be." Thomas's voice was steady. "David, the person I respect most in my life is Michael. I respect his loyalty, and even more, his integrity." David's mouth hung open. His mind went completely blank. The grand narrative he'd built about his own struggle, brilliance, and success collapsed at its foundation. Thomas looked at him, disappointment plain in his eyes. "So when I signed that contract with Summit Forge, when I gave you profit margins far above market rate, you really thought it was because your proposal was unmatched?" Thomas shook his head, a trace of pity in his tone. "David, I wasn't doing business. I was repaying a debt to Michael for giving up his daughter's life-saving money so I could survive. As for that clause in the contract," Thomas continued, "Michael personally suggested I add it. He told me, 'Thomas, my daughter is simple-minded. She judges people by appearances. David has drive, but his character is unstable, too easily blinded by praise and applause. Add this clause for me. Think of it as a protective charm for her. If one day this boy can't even protect his own family, if he can betray the person who treated him best, then it means something is broken at his core. And someone like that isn't worth saving again." Thomas set the teacup down. The base touched the clay tray with a soft tap. That sound, however, exploded like thunder in David's head. "So, David," Thomas said calmly, "the one who terminated the contract wasn't me. It was you and Michael." That final sentence was like an invisible iron hammer, smashing every last shard of David's pride and self-image. His so-called business genius, his endlessly bragged about personal charm, his drunken tales of secret tricks for winning over Thomas. In that moment, all of it turned into an absurd, tragic joke. He was never a self-made prodigy. He was merely the interest on a single act of kindness from his father-in-law, a clueless clown basking in borrowed light, mistaking himself for the sun when he was nothing more than a piece of reflective glass. Every bit of his success had been built on a family he had never truly acknowledged, and had even come to look down on. He staggered out of the tea lounge like a soulless shell. Outside, the sun was bright and warm. Yet he felt as though he had fallen into an ice pit, one that would never see daylight again. 07. When David got home, he saw his mother, Linda, lying on the couch with a gold foil face mask on, trimming her nails while directing the housekeeper on what to cook for dinner. When she noticed him, she even smiled. "Sweetheart, don't look so down. Out with the old, in with the new. If Sophia didn't work out, I'll find you someone better. Good family, well-educated, refined. She'll even give me a big, healthy grandson." David finally snapped. Like a wounded beast driven into a corner, he unleashed everything he'd heard at the tea lounge, mixed with endless regret, shame, fury, and despair, right at his mother. The gold mask on Linda's face crumpled in shock. When she finally understood that the yellow-faced housewife who didn't socialize, the very woman she'd personally driven out, had actually been their family's true lifeline and good luck charm, all the color drained from her face. She went deathly pale. "No, that's impossible, absolutely impossible," she muttered. Then, like someone clutching at a life preserver, she grabbed David's arm and screamed hoarsely, "What are you standing around for? Go, now! Go find Emma. Beg her to come back. Kneel if you have to. Bring her back." At that moment, David's father, the quiet, unassuming man who barely had any presence in the household, suddenly stormed out of the bedroom. He'd clearly heard everything. His face was flushed a deep purple as he rushed up to Linda, raised his calloused hand, and slapped her hard across the face. Smack. The sound was sharp and terrifying. "You foolish, short-sighted woman," he roared, eyes bloodshot, pointing at Linda with all his strength. "How many times did I tell you Emma was a good kid? I told you to treat her well. And what did you do? Constant nitpicking, endless sarcasm, tearing this family apart. And now? Are you satisfied? You pushed a mountain of gold. No, you pushed our family's lifeline right out the door. Are you happy now?" It was the first time he had ever hit his wife in more than 30 years of marriage. Linda clutched her burning cheek and collapsed to the floor, wailing like an animal being slaughtered. The home that had once been filled with joy, ready to pop champagne to celebrate my departure, had now completely turned into a living hell of blame, curses, and despair. 08. After that, David completely lost it. He showed up day and night outside the apartment building I rented, carrying all kinds of gifts he thought I might like. The latest Hermes bags, newly released jewelry, even a print by my favorite painter, flown in from France at great expense. Those things piled up at my door like a heap of beautifully wrapped trash. I ignored him every single time. Finally, one cold, drizzly evening, he blocked me at the entrance of the building as I was coming home from work. He'd lost a frightening amount of weight. His eye sockets were sunken, his beard unkempt. The once crisp suit now hung off him, wrinkled and shapeless. When he saw me, it was like a drowning man spotting his last piece of driftwood. He rushed over and with a thud, knelt straight down in front of me, right there in front of passing neighbors. The icy rain quickly soaked his hair and clothes, making him look like a stray dog that had lost everything. "Emma, I was wrong. I really know I was wrong." He clutched my calf tightly, sobbing like a child. "Forgive me, let's get back together, okay? If you come back with me, Thomas's contract will come back. The company can survive. We can go back to how things used to be." Every word he said felt like a rusty, dull knife sawing back and forth through my chest. Even now, all he cared about was still his contract, his company. He wanted me back, not out of love, not out of remorse, but because I was the only tool that could take him back to the past. I looked down at him calmly, at the man I had loved with everything I had for 8 years, now completely unrecognizable. There was no hatred in my heart, not even anger, only a deep, settled sadness, the kind that comes when everything has finally turned to dust. "David," I said slowly, my voice unusually clear against the sound of the rain, "get up. Don't do this here. You're only making me look down on you more." He didn't move. He stubbornly lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes full of pleading. "If you don't say yes, I won't get up. I'll kneel here until I die." Gently, but with all the strength I had, I pulled my leg out of his grip, inch by inch. "The problem between us was never a contract," I said. "Do you remember when we first met? You were broke, with nothing to your name. Why did I choose you? It wasn't because your plans were grand. It was because one day I casually said I wanted dessert from that old shop on the south side, and you rode a beat-up bike through a storm across half the city just to buy it for me. Back then, you always gave me the beef from your bowl first." David's body shook violently. A distant, painful confusion flashed through his eyes. "But later you changed," I continued. "You started to enjoy the flattery. You got addicted to the feeling of being in control. You thought my reminders were overthinking, my concern narrow-minded. You didn't love me, David. What you loved was the identity of Michael's son-in-law, the shortcuts and halo that came with it. You loved having a perfect backdrop that let you enjoy all of it guilt-free, one that would never expose your self-made myth. And I don't want to be anyone's backdrop anymore." I looked straight into his eyes and told him, word by word, with absolute clarity, "My name is Emma. I'm not just Michael's daughter, and I'm not your ex. I'm just me." With that, I opened my umbrella, didn't look back, and walked through the building's security gate. Behind me came his choked sobs, tangled with despair and regret. The rain washed the sound away until it blurred into nothing, no longer my concern. When I got home, I called my dad. I didn't exaggerate or embellish. I simply told him everything, exactly as it had happened. He was silent on the other end for a long time. Finally, he sighed and said, "I understand. You've been through a lot, sweetheart. Whatever you decide, your dad supports you." After that, through bits and pieces from old friends, I heard how David's family ended up. Summit Forge never saw a miracle. After struggling for a few months, it filed for bankruptcy and liquidation. David didn't just lose everything overnight. Because of personal joint liability, he was saddled with massive debts he'd never repay in several lifetimes. He sold the house. He sold the car. The once media-praised industry disruptor had to take a sales job at a small company just to survive, bowing and scraping, forcing smiles. Word was he developed a drinking problem, often getting blackout drunk late at night, repeatedly muttering, "If only back then I hadn't." His mother, Linda, suffered a stroke after the double blow of bankruptcy and family collapse. She survived, but was left partially paralyzed. After she was discharged from the hospital, she and David's father divorced. The woman who had once treated her son like the sky itself, who valued money and status above all else, ended up alone in a nursing home bed, her final years bleak and desolate. As for Sophia, her reputation in the industry was completely destroyed. That attempted poaching stunt branded her as untrustworthy. After several failed tries to find a decent position, she left the city in disgrace. And me. With the little savings I had left, plus some startup money my father practically forced on me under the name of angel investment, I opened a small refined design studio. I picked up my brushes and my profession again. Maybe my talent had never faded. Maybe it was the courage that comes from breaking and rebuilding. Either way, my style grew more mature, bolder than before. With solid skills and the occasional quiet referral from my father's old friends, the studio's business quickly found its footing. Life was busy, but the feeling of holding my own fate again was deeply grounding. I didn't rush into another relationship. After that dreamlike marriage, I enjoyed this independence, this freedom of living entirely for myself. On weekends, I visited art museums or went sketching in the mountains outside the city. Sunlight streamed through the skylight of my studio, warming my canvas and settling on the sunflowers I'd just painted, blooming wild and brilliant. I looked at that blazing field of gold and suddenly smiled. At last, I had found her again, the version of myself from before I ever met David. The one who couldn't sleep over a perfect idea. The one who stayed endlessly curious about the world. The one with stars and oceans in her eyes. The one who truly, finally, shined.
Thank you for listening to Whispered Women's Stories. This isn't a tale of regret. It's a lesson in clarity. Love that costs your dignity was never love. She didn't rebuild his world. She reclaimed her own. If this story resonated with you, like, subscribe, and stay with us.